Good morning, Brandon.
Morning, Steve.
Let's see. Slack here.
Hi, Steve.
Good day. How you doing?
Okay.
And there we go. I guess we did start a couple of minutes early. Marina, I feel like name that tune. Just that little sound sounded like that Eddie Murphy movie where he's like running around delivering cigarettes or something. What is it? The LA Cop or something? I don't know.
Thinking Beverly Hills Cop.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
That's the
About
one.
to say LA Cop. I never heard that one, but
Yeah, no, it's fault in all the pieces. All right. I think we have the beginning of quorum to start. Cool. All right, let's do our rituals. Who's on first today? Actually, all right, the one thing we learned from last week was, or last time, was not just chair, but note taker.
I can be the note taker today.
Awesome.
Samir, I'll be the note taker.
Who was chair last time? We have attendee. Oh wait, Marina was chair last time, and
yeah.
Justin didn't make it. Justin said he'll be here for the second half. So I guess I'll take the chair. And oh wait, we're doing it the other way. I see. And Samir, if you want to sign in, put yourself as note taker, that'd be great.
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you. If I seem a little distracted, I've got a big Bernese Mountain Dog who's a pup, but already big, roaming around and watching it for my son. So he's very happy to be around and very distracting. So we'll see how that goes.
Full disclosure upfront, I think I'm on the agenda to talk about signing verification. It probably was meant for Milan. Let me check with him if I can present the talk he had.
Okay, great. Is Malin gonna not make it today?
No, he had some conflict come up, but let me check with him.
Okay. Do we have that as, I know we got the HackMD doc we're working on, but do we have an issue that's tracking that?
Well, we have a roadmap feature request or roadmap issue that we are tracking to it, but it's but not a pull request yet.
Okay. So let me just pop that as the link. So payload signature support. Plug in the API interface spec, that's the one. Although, does that, I don't see the HackMD link. Oh, no, there it is. Nope, it just didn't show up in the board. So let me come back over here. Okay, great. Okay, sorry, Brendan. I was just trying to catch up with some stuff before we kick off. Okay, so back to the agenda. Brendan, you're up first.
Yeah,
Just,
I know.
just as a sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know I missed this one before, so I was throwing it back on just because I didn't have the recording to go back and look at. So just kind of wanted to catch up on where we're at with the support for version 1 or the older distribution registries.
So it's more of a question for teeing up the topic for now, as opposed to
Yeah, just to see where we're at, where we're thinking of going with it. Answering Q&As, I can throw out there what I was thinking of with this.
No, it's fair. So I know a couple of weeks ago it came up, and obviously this is something we've always planned to do and something we've wanted to do. It's just, I was thinking about this morning, every day you wake up with far more on your list than you could possibly do. So it's all, which is a good, healthy, invigorating thing. It also means you have to figure out what are you going to triage and what are you going to focus on. What we've been discussing is making sure we're happy with the experience that we're actually shooting for, and then figuring out how to do the right fallback. Because we obviously, if the fallback it can give us 100%, then we wouldn't need a new design. Also, fallback is part of that working group discussion, which I'm hoping we'll have closure and a vote on it tomorrow that we'll be able to kick that off. So I actually see that as the major focal point for how we'll at least have a broader discussion around fallback.
Sorry, which working group? Is this the OCI one?
The reference.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the current thinking of like the goal and the plan and and the timeline. I've pivoted personally. I can tell you I've pivoted back and forth between we should do it right away so we can actually start showing validations end to end, to well, but is that going to distract us from what we're actually trying to build? Because every time we look at it, there's no easy fix. There's no obvious answer. It's always about what's the trade-offs. So what I wanted to go back to is kind of like that whole analogy I did at the OCI Summit was it's not a matter of which design is good, because there's lots of interesting designs. Which of the designs are going to be best for the set of requirements? Let's get the requirements written down, knowing we're not going to solve all of them. But at least we can say, okay, this is the list of requirements. This is the trade-offs for V1 support and V2 to move forward. The reason it's also, in my opinion, falling into the working group is there's a big dependency on what can be done with the existing manifests. There's a whole versioning conversation that gets wrapped up into that. That's part of what Jason brought up at the OCI Summit. It's one of the first sessions we had. We pivoted and did a bunch of the things we did with OCI artifacts and the following manifest because it wasn't viewed as the changes we felt we needed to make to the existing manifest was reasonable. So perception might have changed on that by now, but I think that's one of the first things we have to untangle. So that's basically, there's just a big furball there. And I think we need to list out the requirements and then figure out what the options are and go from there. I don't want to stall any innovative ideas around it. So that's why I saw your comment on whatever the index conversations was. Because none of them are going to be perfect, let's continue to look and we can see how they map to these requirements and the trade-offs.
Yeah, I've been looking different places of, does it make sense to add it as another entry in an index? Does it make sense to add it as a hashtag that you throw in there? And there are less ideal options all around, no great options. And I think that kind of goes back to saying, yeah, the working group, it'll have a valuable output. But the reason I keep bringing this one up as much as I do is because I think we're pushing out there saying, hey, we've got this Alpha 1 release. People should go out there and take a look at it. Nobody I know is going to take a look at it because it doesn't work with their registry. And they're not going to spin up a second registry to play around with this.
I hear you. I've heard a bit of that feedback. That's why we push to get at least one region in Azure working. I've not wanted to make this specifically about Azure, at all. It's never been about that. It's always around the ability to move across multiples. So That's why I've been engaging as much as I can with every registry operator to, have them implement as well. So the first major demo I'd love to show is how we could promote content from one registry to another. That's really what I'd love to show. We can stand that up with distribution instance. But even that distribution instance, even if we had finished it up and merged it into main, is not something people can run in production. It's never been intended to be fully complete.
Yeah, we're just going to have a lot of brownfields that we're going into with this. People that want signing are usually the established companies that have containers deployed in production today and probably more than likely have their own registry server. And so to tell them that they have to spin up a second registry server just to use this, they're going to look at the other options and pick the other option every time.
I think we'll see. There's other options where, whether it be some of the other registry products that people could stand up in the relative clouds and in the environments, if that provides a better experience, then maybe they'll choose that. This has always been one of those VHS Betamax kind of situations, is, or whatever the analogy you want to make of new technology coming out, is the new thing good enough to worth the switch? Is the old, Band-Aids put on the old thing good enough? I think we haven't found a great example of the current ones. There is just way too many flaws with each one of them. I don't know. That's why right now all I can do is focus on what I think the best experience should be. And as we get further along, we will figure out what the fallback will be. That's part of what you're seeing here is we had a conversation around, should we do fallback, or do we need to figure out how to do the key vault extensibility? For instance, we have revocation we have to figure out. We have all these list of things, but until we actually get end to end, it doesn't matter if we have a good fallback support. What matters, do we have a good end-to-end experience? So that's kind of where, that's just, again, back to that first tangent I did, is just what are we going to prioritize? And what we put in Alpha 2 is not fallback support yet.
Yep.
At least I think we did. Samir, is that correct? Fallback support did not make the cut in Alpha 2.
Yeah, correct. I think we aren't, or I'm not tracking fallback as part of Alpha 2. End-to-end is what we are focused on.
Yeah, see, milestone listed as future. So,
yeah. And future just means it's not in the current sprint. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful it'll come in Alpha 3. I think. Sorry, Samir, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the same thing, that future doesn't mean that it's not being in consideration as we start thinking about Alpha 3. It should slide in Alpha 3. We can have that discussion.
Yep. That's all I got.
Appreciate the push and encourage. I think I would encourage looking at different designs, but I would also encourage somebody to start writing down what the requirements are. I know I said I was going to do that, and I realized I just don't have the bandwidth right now to write those out. I can review, I can throw out some things, but to actually own that list and continue to curate it, and with the expectations people would have of, hey, I've got this idea, here's some feedback. Okay, now I got to spend another 15 minutes or an hour to iterate that. That was just became unrealistic for me to make.
And I think it would be nice, I think, to at least make a decision about, if we're going to do a fallback and what we're going to do for that, so that so that people with registries today or whatever can make their decisions about what to do, basically using real information if we make this decision sooner rather than later.
Well, what decision? I think we will support fallback, so it's not like a decision that we're not going to do it, so you should go use something else. It's just a matter of when it comes in.
Yeah, but I think maybe then it's the decision of when we do it, so they can say, okay, so if I need this in a month, or if I need this in 6 months, is this an option I can go with? Or is this something that we're not going to be able to do? Yeah, I think that might be nice to have.
Yeah, no, look, there's obviously some ideas that have been put out there. We've looked at them. I don't feel like those meet the goals of what we said was Notary B2.
Well, I think the whole point of a fallback is this isn't like the best option, right? That's not really the goal here. This is it's an okay option, I think, is the goal. And I think that the most okay option, I think, is what we need to figure out and then just make a decision.
One that sucks less than all the others or something like that. What was the t-shirt from years ago? So yeah, I think, Brandon, I'll offer it to you. If you want to start owning that list of here's what we think the requirements are, and then a columns of option 1, 2, and 3, then I think that would be awesome, because we're going to need that for that working group anyway. So I hate frustrating people with, hey, here's this great design. Like, it is great, but what problem did it solve the problem? Well, you didn't tell me what the problem was, so this is the design they came up with. That's a very frustrating experience for people that are putting their effort into, designing something. So I see that as continual frustration point.
Yep. I'll work on what I can do over there. I don't know how much of what I put in there gets taken elsewhere. And so I just want to make sure that whatever I do is actually valuable and useful.
If we can get that list, I think that is the most valuable thing we could possibly come up with. Because then we all are figuring out, oh, okay, like we've got a design competition, if you will. What are the rules of the competition, right? If you're going to be in a competition, you want to know where the start line is, where the finish line is, and what the rules are. Otherwise, it's a race with no rules. Like, what does that mean? So maybe that's a better analogy. Hey, Justin.
All right.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
No worries.
Hi, Justin.
So Samir, did you want to tick away at the verification extensibility?
Sorry, can I, were you talking about, sorry, did I just backwards compatibility? Sorry, can you just summarize, sorry, I was late. Can you just summarize what you said? Because I've been doing some prototyping on this.
So what I was actually trying to say is exactly putting grounds to what you've been prototyping, what Brandon's been prototyping, what others have been prototyping, what we've been thinking is we need to write down what the ground rules of the race are. What exactly are we trying to achieve?
Yeah.
What are the list of requirements so that we can say design A, B, and C are all great designs, but this is the one that worked out to be best to meet these requirements and the trade-offs. Because we know the list of requirements of what we're trying to achieve can't be achieved with a fallback, or we wouldn't be doing the new manifest designs. So rather than focus on training for the triathlon, if you will, first, is let's define that it actually is a triathlon, and here's what the result of the thing looks like, and then we can go off and let's iterate on that list. Because otherwise we're just frustrating people like yourself that are working on some designs that we measured, what are we even measuring? Have we written down what we're even measuring these designs against?
Yeah, I've tried to do that a little bit. Brandon, do you want to sync on that? I'll be happy to spend some time
Sure.
to you on that.
Sure, happy to catch up on that.
Yeah, that would be good because I've got a bunch of things. I think you're and there's a few kinds of there's also how it relates to some of the other proposed fallback mechanisms that we have now and so on. So yeah, be happy to try and write up some requirements around that.
I think we have no lack of people that come up with the designs. I think we should come out with a list of requirements, then we can do the trade-off. And then I'm sure the designs will iterate based on what those requirements are and the ideas that will come up. So that'll be a great fork, if you will, of work in parallel we can do.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff I've been chatting with over on distribution spec has just been seeing, are some of the options even feasible? They're trade-offs. We can compare all the different solutions, but if some of them aren't even feasible, it's not even worth considering them. That makes our job a lot easier.
And just for Justin's sake, I know we're almost 20 minutes in, but the thing I was starting off when I beginning of this is what is viable to change or take advantage of in the existing manifests. One of the conversations, and this is part of what something Justin's been thinking about, is putting the signatures is in annotations. Today, the specs don't say anything about how long an annotation should be. And the data element conversation made this a very interesting conversation. I've kind of tossed out there that I'd love to see annotations being something that's indexable. And we have to figure out how manifests don't explode to be so big that they become blobs, right? The whole idea is there to be small, tight things that you can cache and blah, blah, blah. If we go and innovate something that all of a sudden makes an annotation be 3 meg in size, and I'm purposely being excessive, I don't think that's the proposal. then it makes it very hard to kind of put wraps on it and say, hey, we're going to now do a new search API on the registry and annotations can be indexed. But now we need this monstrous server just to index this thing. So I'd put out like opening bid of 256 or 512 characters maybe as a max on annotations. I don't know if that's a reasonable thing or not, but those are the kind of pieces that as we start to explore the edges of the specs of the manifests, what is it that would fit within what we think fits within the current bounds? Because we have annotations that are defined. We just didn't say there's a max length. And then there's this whole conversation of can we add other properties to the manifest, to the existing manifests. So those are things that I'm hoping will come out of the working group. But again, I think if we come back with the requirements, then we could say, oh, okay, we could actually check off 3 more boxes in the requirements if we did this one thing in the in the existing manifest versus the new. So just as an example, the whole versioning question and the defining the edges of the existing specs will really help clarify what we actually believe is possible and we want to support across all the registries. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that we're trying to design something with maximal backward compatibility and maximal compatibility, whatever exactly that means in practice, because that's a fuzzily defined concept. But there's no point having something that has any requirements that are not trivially satisfied by all registries. Otherwise, otherwise it's not really a fallback.
Exactly. And then I've heard other conversations. Well, but if a registry just did this one other thing, like if the argument is we want to support existing registries, that means there can't be any changes on the registries.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're going to make a change, then part of the problem isn't just how big is the change. Can I make a change and have customers deploy it, especially the ones that are running like JFrog and Harbor or even the ACR connector registry where they're running it on-prem and it's not under our control to update as a service, right? Like those are the ones that even if the product makes any 3 lines of change, it still has to be rolled out. So I think the bar is what do existing registries support? And then if they're going to make a change, what change would they make that actually gets the most bang for the buck?
I continue to be amazed by registries that don't support things that we thought every registry supports. So yeah, I can feel that pain.
Yeah, that's the thing Vanessa was trying to solve a while ago with just can we start documenting how to actually use these registries, because there was only a couple of us that actually implemented them. It's awesome to see all the people taking off that they want to do more with them. I mean, the number of questions that are coming in around the specs recently is really awesome to see, because it means that people are starting to stretch the envelope. Okay, Samir.
Yep, thank you. So we are just gonna discuss or look at the doc that Milind has been iterating on. He couldn't join today. So this is part of this roadmap issue that we are tracking. And if you look at this roadmap issue, there's a HackMD link in there. And I can actually share the HackMD link directly if that will be better. So how about we take a few minutes, read through it. So he has clearly iterated on it since last time he thought he presented it here in terms of how can different key providers or different service providers can integrate with the base implementation of notation and then tie back to give a end-to-end experience. So have a read and then we can discuss.
Hey, Anish, we're just reviewing the updated specs, so doing the silent read and we'll come back.
Sounds good. Hey.
And I just pasted a link for you, Anish, because I know you don't see the history.
Thank you.
I see we have a couple of hands raised. Is that people who have finished reading and they want to ask questions?
Sorry, I typed it to try not to be too distracting. We were following the procedure that when you're done reading, raise your hand so we know when to
Oh, I didn't see that.
continue.
Oh, I was following the turn your video back on. We've only finished reading pattern, but either way.
Yeah, then everybody puts their video on, so I didn't see
Yeah.
over.
I see most people have finished reading, still waiting on a few to finish. Fashel, Mahinder, Dan, Shive.
Do folks need more time or? I saw Fashel's hand wave for a second. Why don't we get started?
Yeah, let's get started. So let's see. Is there a way to see who raised the hand first? I want to give them the floor first.
I think I did. I have just a really quick question. I think we've talked about before. I just want to double check about the verification. Because I know that the signing and verification are obviously tied to each other, right? You have to verify using the same whatever you use to sign. But I know that that's not included here, but is there a plan to kind of make that somehow connected so that you can just install plugins once and then have both the signing and verification tied together?
Yeah, I think that's probably a level of implementation detail that I have not had a chance to discuss with Milind. But at a high level, my thought is that there'll be instances where the verification is only needed, and because signing is happening in different part of it. So while it could be the same plugin, which does both verification and implementation or signing, but in some instances, only verification is ever called from that plugin. If that's the question you were asking.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, because if one plugin was used for signing, right, no one can verify it unless they have the matching one, right? Because it doesn't match.
Let me think about that. Because you want. Go ahead.
There are keychains, and so I was about to ask if we want to have a plugin interface that says, "Give me the full keychain to go back up to the root for the key that I used," and so you'd be able to package that up with the rest of your signature.
If they're using like a different signing algorithm or something using the plugin, because you want to know that ahead of time before looking at the keys, because then you have that whole one of those JWT. It's not a JWT problem. It's a problem that has happened with JWTs, right? Where you have the algorithm defined in the signature.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can if I can answer the question. It's recorded. I will touch base with Milind and we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, cool.
I think in general, we talked about that one, we need to be more clear around some of the verification flows, including revocation and all those kind of pieces that are in there. But one of the things that we were talking about is, obviously you sign something and you hope it gets verified far more times than it's signed, right? That's kind of the model. But we also want to make sure that we can support ephemeral, like you shouldn't have to go to a remote server to do every verification. There should be an optimization, because it's not as, you can verify securely where you can't really sign securely by bringing a key local. So one of the examples was if I have my ephemeral client configured with what those public keys are, do I even need a plugin? Do I need to do a remote call? So I added a comment at the very bottom where some of the offline discussions were kind of happening, because there's conversation of the thing that Anish will show, and what Sajay was asking about was, do we even need a plugin depending on how the verification is done? So I put a comment in the last one. I think we'll need some additional data added to it that says, I don't have a plugin, but here's the thing that I'm doing verification with. So do you look for a local key? Do you look for a local other thing? That pivot needs to be added to the key entry in what's currently the configuration, what will become the policy. So I think those will continue to flush out as we're writing the specs and as we're doing the iterations.
Yeah, I think having verify only plugins is probably or verify only paths is probably useful from that point of view, because the signing is more complicated. I think maybe every plugin that can do signing should be able to verify, just so you can round trip test it. But having a verify only path does make sense, because it's, as you say, if you've got once you've got the public key, then that's kind of good.
I think my main thing is I just want to make sure that it's equally well defined so that you can actually verify the stuff that's signed. It's kind of
Yeah. I think that's a TBD item for us to flesh that out. But there was something which said earlier. I want to go back to it. So because it's cross-registry verification, so signatures put by one registry in one and being verified in some other cloud should also work. So there will be a. So I want to dive deep into it. Is there a concern that signed by one plugin may not be verifiable by the other plugin?
Yeah, because like for example, if a signing plugin decides to I'm trying to think of an actual good example, but they decide to use some other to specify some algorithm or some piece of it, or especially for the signing envelope, right? If you don't know how to parse the envelope, right, you can't actually verify the contents of it.
Got it. So I'm definitely showing my ignorance here, not having dug deep into that part of it. But wouldn't there be, if you don't recognize something in your signature verification policy, you will say, hey, I don't recognize something in the signature, but I recognize these mandatory aspects. So based on that, it's either a pass signature or a failed signature. It's only the optional parameters which may not be recognizable by a third-party plugin.
Yeah, I think it just depends on how the plugin uses those optional ones, and if they do anything with them that would then, make it insecure if they weren't used.
Got it.
Which
That makes
would be
sense.
a concern. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else has any questions, comments on this doc?
I'm a little bit concerned that everyone will use the second mechanism, because there's a lot of signing APIs that don't really support the first mechanism, even though it's kind of cleaner. And but it's a lot of mechanisms don't let you pass the hash. They want you to pass the whole content, and they want to hash it, for example, which is obviously, basically the ones that don't tend to be remote ones where it's inconvenient, but or where the content might be large and you can pre-hash it. But in general, I think that an awful lot of interfaces, like software interfaces, look like the second one, and I think people might just use that, and it's sort of having a choice might become a bit redundant, and everyone will just choose the second one because everything can work with the second one.
Okay. So Justin, if I were to please paraphrase it, you were asking us to think hard about, can the first one be simplified or be made more flexible that a lot more people can use it versus just reliant on the second mechanism in all cases? So what can go back into the first mechanism to make it more widely usable is the challenge you're throwing on the table.
Yeah, and I suspect it might become the case that the first one would be used exclusively for like cloud remote interfaces, where in general people do ask you to pre-hash the content in those APIs because they don't want to receive the content. And the second one will be used for everything else, which is not ideal.
Fair point. Yep. Yeah, I think this is a work in progress doc, so this is a fair comment to go back into it.
I mean, part of the goals is verification should be, I don't want to say quick and easy, it's an oversimplification. It should be efficient, and there should be a way to, do it in an efficient way that doesn't have to have not only a remote call, but even a plugin. Like, we made a very conscious choice that
which means maybe we should only have one interface for verification that does pass the content on the grounds, because the content never has to go to the remote end. There's no point pre-hashing the content or anything, you just provide it. So a single interface for verify and two interfaces for sign might be simpler and might work okay for everything.
And the other point I was going to make, though, is because we made a very conscious choice that the remote providers, the remote signing should be a provider and a separate binary, was we never wanted somebody to have to come to the notation team because they wanted to write another provider. Right? That shouldn't be gated by us. More importantly, if there's a servicing event or a feature they want to add, they shouldn't be gated by the notation maintainers to service or anything to do with that. It should just completely self-enabled. At the same token, on verification, I'm hoping that there's some default schemes that can be set up where you don't need to pull the notation binary and a binary for verification. Like I'm hoping, might be unrealistic, that the verification can be done without an additional binary, because you'll be able to just put something on disk and there'll be some standard format for it. We'll see how realistic that is.
So is generate signature a strict subset of the generate envelope, in which case we could potentially just have generate envelope, and if it's going out to a cloud service, it would just implement that local hashing and then send that off to the cloud for you. And so we don't need to have two methods.
Fair point. Yes, there is a subset, superset relationship there, but not being aware about the implementation details, I can't say if one can be done like that.
I think it probably could be, yeah. And that might be a good split. And we could, yeah, I would think that could be done.
Yeah, because while you don't necessarily want to send it out to the external cloud, it doesn't mean that locally you couldn't just send this data over a standard IO pipe. That's not going to be a huge overhead.
Yeah, and because there's some local things that you can't send hashes for, like some of the FIPS compliant things want to do the hashing on chip, or even when it's really expensive and things like that as well. So there's a kind of there's other use cases where you can't use the first one, even if you think you might. But you should always be able to split the work in the way that works for you.
So I'm just going to time check, because we wanted to give Anish time to show it, and he was, I twisted his arm to get up early enough to join to do this. So obviously the doc is there. Please give feedback. It's great feedback. To key up, so when we started writing this this hack doc in the beginnings of the spec, we said, all right, this is a great idea. Can we validate it? So Anish has created the SMI work, and he was able to free up some time to take that knowledge and apply it to how we would do a key vault provider. So he wrote it based on the kind of the first iteration. So with that, I will give to Anish to show an example of this.
Hey, let me just. Do you all see my screen? Cool. So yeah, I went over the initial spec, like so right before this iteration, there was another spec. So what I did was I went through that and then tried to convert some of that into a working POC, just so we can have something working. And then going forward, as we hash the spec, we can make changes to it. So some of the things that I added as part of the POC was a dynamic plugin registration mechanism, the first thing. So if you want to register a plugin, basically you can call the notation CLI, say plugin add with a plugin name, and then the path to the binary where the plugin is found. So this basically tells notation that if a user wants to use this particular plugin, the binary is in this location. So you can just call this with the JSON and the standard in, and then expect a response in standard out and standard error. And then with that, there is also an option to list plugins. So if they do plugin list, it gives them a list of plugins that have been registered with notation, and then also the path where the plugin's found. And then there's a remove plugin command, which will basically go and delete the plugin. I will share this doc later, so you can also actually look at what I'm doing with the config file. Then in terms of sign, when the user actually wants to sign using an external KMS plugin, what they do is initially they add the key. So they do notation key add, and then the name is basically the profile that they want to do. And then ID is something that I thought is required, is the bare minimum that's required for the external KMS plugin. So it can be the key ID, which has all the metadata that's required for the plugins to use. and then the plugin name. So as a user, I would go and say notation key add my profile, and then the plugin that I want to use with Azure, this is Azure Key Vault. And then this ID for Azure Key Vault has all the required information. So this has the Azure Key Vault name, and then it has the key that needs to be used, and then also the version that needs to be used. And then similarly, there is key remove, key back, key delete, and key update. All of those work with this. And then for verify, right now for the POC, I'm doing remote verification. So that means every time verify is run, there's actually a call being made to cloud provider to do the verification and then return a response back. But I think in future, as we work on the spec, one kind of optimization is the plugin still implements sign and verify, but it can be up to the plugin to say, I'm going to cache the entire keychain and then just do the verification locally, or I'm going to make a cloud provider call to do it. But I think that might be something that the plugin can determine. Okay, I will show you a quick demo. Okay, so first, if I want to add a plugin, I do plugin add and then Azure Key Vault, and then this plugin is particularly in this location. And then if I do a plugin list, I can see that the plugin has been registered and it's in this particular location. And then I've already added keys, but I'll also do it again to show. Okay, so basically here I'm adding a new key and then I'm just calling it my profile, and then I want to use this with the Azure Key Vault plugin. And then the KMS Boolean flag here is to keep the KMS keys separate from the actual keys so that it's easier for the user who looks at the config file rather than just having different types of keys all in a one collection. So if I do this, the key gets added. And then once we do a list, this is where the default keys are, but then I added another subsection just for the KMS keys. But again, these are things that we can actually hash out after this. But the user can see that they have the my profile key, and then it's referring to this particular key, and then the plugin name is that. And then similarly for verification, I've already added the same key to the certs. So if the user does cert list, they can see that this particular key that's being used for verification. And then when I need to sign, I call sign with key my profile. So the my profile matches this, and then I'm calling it on the image. And what this does is it actually calls my KMS binary. So the AKV plugin binary, and then it says sign. And it passes all the required data to the KMS plugin. At this point, what the KMS does is it has its own auth model. So at least for this demo, what I'm doing is we're using service principal to access Key Vault. So it's a simple client ID, client secret. It will go and call a remote sign with Azure Key Vault, get the response, and then send it back to the notation CLI. And then if we check this, so we can see that the sign-on operation worked successfully. And then for validating the end-to-end, if we do a verify with the same thing. Okay, so when I do verify, what it does is it says, okay, I'm going to be using the KMS plugin AKV. And this is all just debug information, but it calls the notation AKV with verify, and then it passes the signature envelope. And then at this point, the notation AKV plugin calls to Azure Key Vault and then does a remote verification and then says everything is okay and then sends a response back. Yeah, this is running through the previous spec that we had. I think the new diff has a lot more commands that are run underneath, but in terms of user experience, this is what it would look like. And I will share this doc.
Sweet.
So I'm thinking through the end-to-end with this. And the thing that I'm thinking of is, as a user, someone else might have gone through and done their signing with Azure Key Vault, and then I'm running it in my own environment that doesn't have access to their Azure Key Vault. Have we thought through what the workflow is going to look like for allowing external users to work with the stuff we've signed using our plugin? And I'm guessing that just means we need a way to extract that certificate and publish that somewhere and let the users verify it that way. But I'm just trying to think through that workflow.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead.
No, so I was going to say, like, right now, this approach goes with the remote verification, right? And then I think that's the valid point. Like, how does another user, so if I run this command, I can do the verification because I have actually access to Key Vault. But then if a different user tries it, it's not something that they can do unless they have access to the Key Vault. And even if we try to cache it locally, there needs to be some way it can be shared with other users if they need to validate it. But I think that, like, that's one thing that we need to think through on how the experience is going to be.
For what it's worth, the way that we're solving this problem with Persia is that whenever we sign something, we also include the algorithm and the signer, and those informations are included in the signature. So the public key is right there, and you know that it's the right public key to sign with, otherwise the verification won't work.
Yeah, it definitely gets into key distribution, which I know we haven't solved yet. And so I'm not pushing for that. I'm just pushing for, as we think about using the plugins, how to extract that certificate so that we can do the key distribution at a future point. So I'm just working through that logic.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump in. So remember, there's two primary scenarios. There's the enterprise scenarios or the customer scenarios, whatever you want to call them. Enterprises tends to be a dirty word, so I don't want to pivot off that thing. But it's basically customers that are trying to validate, create, sign, validate in their own environment. They have absolutely no intention of wanting to have any external sharing. In fact, the more they can lock it down, the better. So that's, like, to some extent, the primary scenario that we're kind of focusing on. Because of the way cloud native development has evolved, most of what they base something on, either the base image or packages they pull in or whatever, are from some public entity, and they absolutely want to know that that's created by an entity that they trust. And in that sense, those are the public distributions, Debian, Alpine, Windows, whatever you want to call that. So what we're saying is that you can keep everything completely private, and you know how to distribute your keys, including the public key for verification. And then for the public content, you get the Debian image from Docker Hub or whatever, that obviously whoever signs it is completely private. Nobody has access to the private key, except even humans don't even really have access. It's the build environment. But the public key is accessible. We haven't worked out all the details of discoverability because if anything, we're so far away from tofu that we have to come back to that. But there's relatively easy ways to solve it. We just need to go off and do it. So that's part of why the verification is a little different. I might have the public key cached locally. That is done having nothing, that it's done as an offline process. It might be the Azure CLI, it might be the Docker CLI that installed those public keys. Use the Azure CLI when running on AWS using Microsoft software. So we'll figure that out. Those are separate paths, and we definitely have that in as a thought process. So you would take the public key, if it truly is public, and you would make it available for somebody to pull and use and verify. But we do have to write this down more.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that might need to be part of, and I did throw as a comment on the plugins draft doc of we probably need an API in there to extract that public key and their certificate chain as well. Make sure that's included as part of that plugin interface.
When you say extract the public key, like the public key won't be, like the whole idea is you need the two-step verification. You can't just verify it based by looking at it. You need to say, all right, here's what I'm trying to validate. Here's the signature from the Debian image.
When I say it, I'm going toward I'm a signer. I need to give people my public key. And if I'm going out to some kind of KMS, do I need to go through a separate process, or can I just use the plugin and say, plugin, give me that key? You just use the private key to sign it. You've got the public key right there. Just give it to me.
Yeah,
So that's kind
so-
of where I'm going with that.
Yeah, so what I'm saying about including the public key with the signed annotation is that if the public key doing that much tells you that whoever signed it knew the corresponding private key. If you also include in that whatever it is we're using to identify the signer, be that they're perhaps whatever the identifier is, then you really have everything you need within the Notary 2.
Yep. I know we're short on time and Justin's probably about to run on us. So I was going to throw one little thought that this probably, the whole plugin interface and what we're doing here maps really closely with the Docker credential helpers. And so if there's anything that we would have wished we could have done with all the credential helpers over the years that we're missing on this, now is a great time to say, hey, let's fix this issue while we can.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll add some comments. I mean, I think that there's a question about whether you need to register plugins. We don't usually bother with our plugins. We just put them in a configured directory and it just tries them rather than having a plugin register to make them simpler. But
We did take that change, actually.
yeah,
It was
there's
after
certainly
Rich did his implementation, but it's just a well.
yeah, no, it's fine. There's a few things like that, but there's I think that in general, like the simpler the better. I mean, I think just, yeah, the model of executing things and using standard and send out works pretty well. We use it across a bunch of things, and like the amount of data is not big and these things, so there's no complicated requirements. I think it should be good.
Yep. Thanks, Justin.
I know a couple of stops, some hard stops, including me. So thank you. This is awesome. Mark, I definitely love to follow up more. So I have to run, but I'll try to catch you later. Thanks, folks.